Today, we're travelling back to Victorian times, where the allure of wealth and status often concealed the darker side of those who sought it. This episode centres on William Lionel Felix Tollemache, also known as Lord Huntingtower, a man whose charm and lineage masked a history of deceit, financial ruin, and the exploitation of those closest to him. His life was a tangled web of fraud, mistreatment of women, and broken promises. Stay with us as we unravel the twisted tale of Lord Huntingtower. William Lionel Felix Tollemache was born in 1820 and was the heir to the title of Lord Huntingtower. He was the only child of Lionel Tollemache, the 8th Earl of Dysart. To fully understand this man, however, we need to go a little further back. The Earldom of Dysart and Barony of Huntingtower was first created by King Charles I in 1643 and was given to William Murray, who had been brought up with the then prince. He was the boy who took the prince's punishments at Eton, as the heir to the throne could not receive them. When Charles became king, he hadn't forgotten this sacrifice and therefore created the position for his friend. Since then, the titles and lands passed down for generations. Vast amounts of land were acquired in both Scotland and England, including Somerset, Buckminster, and Lincolnshire. Moving forward to 1793, the 7th Earl, William Manners Tollemache, had problems with the law. He bought himself a position in Parliament via the borough of Ilchester, but was removed a year later and was found guilty of bribery and corruption. In spite, he had a local workhouse torn down. In 1706, he was committed to prison for cutting down a man's trees and beating him when he complained. The 7th Earl died in 1833, but before this he didn't make his son Lionel's life very easy. Lionel married his cousin Maria Toon in 1819, but his father disapproved and refused him an allowance, leaving him to scrape by with a few £100s from his grandmother. As the heir to a vast estate, he found it easy to borrow money. Lionel was able to manage until he inherited his fortune. He must have thought this was a good life lesson, as he did the same thing to his own son. To prevent any confusion with names, I will call William Lionel Felix Tollemache, Lionel's son, Lord Huntingtower from now on. From the age of 15, Lord Huntingtower hadn't received any money from his father. This included his education. In 1837, he left Eton at the age of 17, and having no financial support, he started to borrow money. However, he wasn't able to manage his finances as well as his father had done, and the access to substantial credit became his downfall. A lot later in life, Lord Huntingtower explained to a commissioner that his parents had an unhappy marriage, which led to them living separately. Eventually, Lord Huntingtower's mother and father, Lord and Lady Dysart, divorced, which, for the time, wasn't very common. Lady Dysart stated that soon after her son was born, she was continually in danger from her husband's uncontrollable temper, threats, and eccentric habits. After a detailed account of cruelty, the divorce was granted and Lady Dysart received a settlement of £4,000 a year. By 1841, Lord Huntingtower had been to court twice, once for illegally ringing a bell at night, and the other for waving his cigar near a policeman's face and knocking off his hat. He refused to take the oath on this occasion, and the case was dismissed. Between May 1840 and December 1841, he accrued a staggering £220,000 in debt, approximately £28.6 million in today's money. His creditors included a London diamond dealer named Mr. Thomas Dobson, to whom Huntingtower owed over £19,000. Desperate, he sold Dobson his interest in the family estate and even 8 life insurance policies, all for less than £1,000. It was a desperate, short-sighted move that only temporarily warded off financial ruin. But even with his debts looming, Lord Huntingtower was determined to maintain appearances. In 1841, he spent £3,500 to secure a seat as a Member of Parliament for Andover. In a twist of fate, he was 2 days shy of reaching the age at which he could stand for his seat when he was replaced. His ambitions in politics ended almost as quickly as they began. Unable to make a living through legitimate means, Huntingtower tried his hand as a horse dealer and coach proprietor, but his financial situation only worsened. He traded approximately 250 horses, but he was then declared bankrupt and was imprisoned for 10 months in the Queen's prison. When questioned about his finances, Huntingtower hadn't kept any records and couldn't account for his assets or debts. Whether through ignorance or deception, it's hard to say. After his short prison stay, he continued as he had done before and was again in court. A creditor, George Samuel Ford, tried to stop the second bankruptcy on a technicality, claiming that Huntingtower was not truly a trader. The attempt failed, but it highlighted just how much Huntingtower was allowed to get away with. Even when he had been declared bankrupt twice, he was still borrowing more. In February 1843, Huntingtower was in court waiting to hear if his bankruptcy certificate was granted for the second time. The commissioner, Mr. Fonblanc, delivered a long judgment in which he said, "This is certainly a most extraordinary case. I have now been in this court during a period of 1/4 of a century in all its various phases. But I must say that this is one of the most remarkable cases which has ever come under my notice, not alone for the large amount of debts, because estates to a much larger amount have frequently been before me, nor for complicated accounts, because more complicated I have seen, but in respect to the peculiar position of the person who is now before me. He is a young man, scarcely 23 years of age, heir to an earldom, and in expectation of a magnificent fortune, and yet now standing before the court in the character of a horse dealer. At first I find him, at the early age of 17, without any legitimate resources or money, thrown upon the world without any selected friend or guide, and I am not surprised that he fell into such hands and bad company. But I did not expect that his bad advisers would have gone so far, nor that he would have been surrounded by so large a knot of evil counsellors, and it would not be using too strong a word if I called them conspirators. The bankrupt is a young man who has fallen upon a den of thieves. Not thieves of necessity, not thieves who rob to supply their daily bread, but, in a moral sense, thieves, more guilty thieves who rob to supply their daily avarice. But I must say that I feel some surprise at some portions of the conduct of the bankrupt, because I do think his sense of honour, his sense of nobility, and his sense of character and station and what was due to all these, ought to have made him revolt from such associates. The blame, therefore, up to this point, attaches to the bankrupt, and he ought to have had more reserve. I do not look very narrowly as to his experience as a trader, and thence again I do not express the usual surprise when I find that as a trader he has kept no books. I do not believe that Lord Huntingtower considered himself to be a trader, that he contemplated any fraud in not keeping books. The next point for consideration is that the bankrupt has been too extravagant. The commissioner's points continued, but at the end he granted the bankruptcy certificate. In August a year later, Huntingtower was in court regarding his insolvency. He explained that his father had visited him frequently whilst he was in prison, but had refused to give him an allowance to help his situation. His mother had done all she could for her son on her limited income, and he had stayed with her and his grandmother in Bath after his bankruptcy. He had had a difficult start in life, but unfortunately, he didn't learn from his mistakes. As if his financial misdeeds weren't enough, Huntingtower's treatment of women revealed a darker side to his character. In 1844, he seduced or possibly coerced Elizabeth Ackford, a maid working for his mother. He took her as his mistress, and they lived together in Scotland, a relationship that Elizabeth believed made them husband and wife under Scottish law. Elizabeth had 3 children with Lord Huntingtower, all girls, but by October 1848, he had grown tired of her. They rented an apartment in London and had introduced themselves as Lord and Lady Huntingtower. The landlady, Miss Pottle, later testified in court to witnessing Lord Huntingtower having a huge argument with Elizabeth, denying her the right to call him husband. Miss Pottle threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. He then left and didn't return. Miss Pottle went to check if Elizabeth was okay. Elizabeth said that her husband wanted to take some papers and letters relating to their marriage. Elizabeth had locked herself and the documents in a room. Lord Huntingtower forced the door open, taking the documents, damaging the door panels in the process. Miss Pottle required £20 owed to her for the rent and the damage to the door. Elizabeth asked for help from Huntingtower's mother, but when this support eventually stopped, she was left destitute with 3 children. By 1850, she was forced to rely on parish relief. There are so many reports in the newspapers regarding Lord Huntingtower not paying creditors or not paying rent for lodgings. He seemed to be using different names around the country and was summoned to court every other month, which went on for years. Elizabeth took the remaining letters she had received from Lord Huntingtower, acknowledging her as his wife and eyewitness statements of the wedding, and with the help of friends, she produced them in court. The court took the evidence to be examined. After this, however, there is no verdict from the court. Everything goes quiet. In September 1851, Huntingtower married his first cousin, Catherine Elizabeth Camilla Burke, the daughter of the Baronet of Glint's Castle in Galway. Everything suggests that this was quite a hushed marriage arrangement, as it was not publicised in the paper, as it should have been for their high status. Was this in case a bigamy claim was brought forward? Or because Lord Huntingtower was a bankrupt? It's possible that the only thing securing the marriage was again his position as heir to the earldom. The newlyweds went straight on a European tour for their honeymoon. Huntingtower was now given a small allowance, but his new marriage did not erase his past. In 1852, Elizabeth reappeared, demanding recognition and financial support for their children. Huntingtower eventually agreed to pay her a small annuity in exchange for her silence, but not before a public scandal erupted. All of the letters that Elizabeth had managed to hold onto were produced as evidence, and they were all addressed to "My dearest Lizzie" and signed "Your dearest husband H." The letters contained details from Lord Huntingtower instructing Elizabeth to contact his own mother for money. In numerous other letters, he would instruct her not to send letters to a certain place, as he had had to move on to other lodgings, and then where and when he had found another place for her and the children to join him. In some correspondence towards the end of their relationship, Lord Huntingtower wrote that he was in London and had been trying all morning to get £2 to send to her, but had been unsuccessful. He said that his family would do nothing for him, and he himself was penniless. Under these circumstances, he advised her to call upon a respectable solicitor, whom he named. He told Elizabeth to ask the solicitor to write to his mother, and he said that, if this were done, the fear of exposure would induce them to give him some money. He advised her to act as though it were of her own accord, and to not say a word about him having advised her, and that if she did so, everything would turn out right. He afterwards wrote again, in which he advised her to apply to the solicitor he had mentioned before, and ask for a summons against him for deserting her. He told her to appear hostile to him, and say that she was compelled to take this step on account of her being in a destitute condition. This, he said, would compel his family to do them justice. In another letter, he told Elizabeth that he had been to St. Albans, and that a person there was going to introduce him to a fool who would give him £600 on the promise that he would get £1,000 in return. He went on to say that he was disgusted with this country and had serious thoughts of going abroad and taking her with him. Huntingtower, after hearing that Elizabeth was ill, wrote to her to inform her that a doctor lived opposite the inn where she was staying. He advised her to apply immediately, as he said he was a very good man, and what was better was that he would stand eternal credit. All of this showed how he conned people out of their money, what lengths he would go to, and just how manipulative he was. According to the landlady's eyewitness account, Huntingtower had already taken the important documents proving any marriage had taken place. However, a statement from a Mr. Kenrick was produced in court, which stated that this gentleman between 1844 and 1848 was in the habit of dining with the couple, and Lord Huntingtower told him that he was determined to take the first opportunity to fulfil his promise to marry Elizabeth. He also asked Mr. Kenrick his advice about the law of marriage in Scotland and said that it was his wish to make the young woman his wife and get married in Scotland so that his father might know nothing about it. Mr. Kenrick said that he was not acquainted with Scottish law of marriage, but advised him to consult a lawyer, and Huntingtower's reply was that he could not trust any lawyer. Shortly after this conversation, Lord Huntingtower went to Scotland and returned after 3 or 4 days and said that he had found a suitable house near Edinburgh. Soon after, Elizabeth went to Scotland. When the parties met again, Lord Huntingtower addressed Elizabeth as his wife, and Mr. Kenrick's impression was that they had been married in Scotland. In addition to this, a reverend who was helping Elizabeth had procured a statement from the servant who was in their household in Scotland and from a policeman in Edinburgh, both of whom had heard Lord Huntingtower address Elizabeth as his wife. All of the children's birth certificates were under Lord Huntingtower's name Tollmache and Elizabeth Tollmache, formerly Ackford, and the registry was signed by Huntingtower himself. Huntingtower took to the stand, however, and stated that he is not and never was married to Elizabeth Ackford. The jury did not find the evidence enough to establish proof that the marriage had taken place. How was a man who talked of conning people out of their hard-earned money, cheating doctors and a history of bankruptcy, a man that could be trusted? The dual life he led, however, one as a respectable husband and the other as a seducer and manipulator, showcased his ability to maintain a facade while exploiting those around him. After the court case, and despite the fact that Huntingtower left Elizabeth destitute, they eventually resumed their relationship, leading to 2 more children, one being a son. Maybe Elizabeth felt that if she had a son, she would be able to do more about her situation. The scandals didn't end there. In 1860, Huntingtower left Catherine and took yet another mistress, Emma Dibble. She bore him 4 more children, further complicating his already chaotic family life. He treated Emma and their children little better than he had treated Elizabeth. In 1865, Elizabeth sued Huntingtower for the annuity he promised her, but he claimed in court that she was, in fact, his legal wife, attempting to use their prior relationship to evade his responsibilities. He then asked Elizabeth for a divorce, which she refused. He succeeded in avoiding further payments, but why wasn't Lord Huntingtower charged with bigamy? From the evidence presented, the magistrate established that Elizabeth was the wife of Lord Huntingtower, and he said that it would be a lot better to come to some arrangement. He then went on to say that it would be a very inconvenient thing for a nobleman to be charged with bigamy. The money for the annuity was settled, but the issue of 2 marriages seemed to be ignored. Huntingtower died in 1872, aged 52, leaving behind a legacy of deceit, financial ruin, and broken lives. He was described in the newspaper in his obituary as a very tall man, almost a giant, dressed in a loose drab coat with enormous pearl buttons, the man who owed hundreds of thousands of pounds. Even after his death, the repercussions of his actions continued. Elizabeth launched a final, desperate legal battle to have her son recognised as the rightful heir, but the courts ruled against her. William, the son of Huntingtower and Catherine Burke, inherited the earldom, cementing the official narrative while Elizabeth and her children faded into obscurity. In 1878, Sir William inherited Ham House and title from his grandfather, the 8th Earl, but he didn't become Lord of the Manor and take full control of the estate at this time. His grandfather had created a board of trustees to oversee the manor, which was to run for 21 years after his death. On his 40th birthday in 1899, William became Lord of the Manor of Ham and Petersham, taking over from the trustees in accordance with his grandfather's will. By this time, his wife had left Ham House and went to live in London. They had no children, and the manor was eventually gifted to the National Trust in 1948. Lord Huntingtower's story is a chilling reminder that the privilege of birth and status often served as a shield against accountability in Victorian society. He exploited those around him, particularly the women who trusted him, and he manipulated the legal system to suit his needs. In the end, his life left behind a trail of cruelty and ruin. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Historical Chronicles. If you found this story interesting, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another episode. Thank you for watching. See you next time.